Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the overwhelming chaos of modern information, the articles, the spreadsheets, the scathing critiques, and distill it into pure, focused, and unforgettable knowledge just for you.
Today, we are undertaking a critical and, well, frankly, a very painful.
It does feel that way.
We're diving into a comprehensive source that examines the state of the film industry in 2025, and it paints an unremittingly grim portrait.
That's putting it mildly. The source material dramatically, and I think maybe prophetically, terms this period the year that broke Hollywood.
And that's not just a catchy headline.
No, not at all. Our source material isn't just sensational. It's a deep, scathing critique detailing not just, financial crashes and box office failure, but what it diagnoses as a deep-seated systemic rot and content malaise within tentpole town.
Exactly. So we aren't here to simply glance at the doom and gloom headlines. Our mission today is to synthesize that confluence of factors, the economic, the creative, and the cultural, that led Hollywood to this crisis.
And the context here is just so important. For years, the rallying cry, the quiet promise that was whispered among studio executives and investors was survive until 25.
Right. Survive until 25.
Yeah.
The industry had gone through this brutal, unprecedented gauntlet. You had global shutdowns, prolonged labor disputes, the writer and actor strikes that halted production for what felt like an eternity.
Forever, yeah. And on top of that, a perceived obligation to cater to what the source calls the message, sometimes, it argues, at the expense of mass appeal.
The belief was that 2025 would be the triumphant return, that all this pent-up demand combined with the newly resolved labor would see the industry just snap back.
Snap right back to its previous status as a money printing machine. The recovery was supposed to be a sure thing.
But according to everything we are seeing in the source stack, that recovery was a complete mirage.
A mirage is the perfect word.
Not only did the situation fail to improve, but the data suggests 2025 was significantly worse than the preceding, the so-called recovery years, and there were very few viable solutions on the horizon.
So to understand the gravity of this collapse, we have to start with the single most alarming statistic that capped off the autumn season.
We have to talk about
We have to discuss October, which our source calls an unmitigated catastrophe. So what is the single figure in the data stack that proves this wasn't just a slow month, but a structural collapse that defines the entire year?
The shocking headline is that Hollywood recorded its lowest October box office return 30. This wasn't just a slow trickle of cash. It was a near complete stop, confirming the very structural failure.
Okay, let's unpack this with extreme prejudice as we move into section. The box office bottom out and the October disaster.
Do it.
So the raw number reported by the Hollywood Reporter for October was a dismal $385 million. I mean, that number hasn't been seen since 19. On its face, it just sounds terrible.
It is terrible.
But when you introduce the factor of inflation, the failure becomes, just staggering. Walk us through the crucial context of inflation adjustment, because that is where the comparison becomes truly terrifying for investors.
Right. You absolutely cannot discuss this figure without adjusting for purchasing power. To neglect inflation is to drastically understate the severity of the drop in audience spending.
Okay.
So while $385 million was the raw take for October 2025, if you adjust the $385 million figure that was earned back in 1997 for inflation, that haul would actually equate to roughly $700 million in today's money.
Wait, hold on. Let me grasp that fully.
Yeah.
We're not just below the 1997 number in raw dollar. We are at almost half of what 1997's lowest October actually represented in terms of audience spending power and tickets sold.
Precisely. That delta, that gap of over $300 million represents audience attendance that simply vanished. It's gone.
So what does that signal to a studio investor?
For Wall Street, it signals a profound loss of confidence in the market. It signals a necessity for fire sales, for write-downs, and the absolute destruction of Q4. I mean, the source material just calls it a shitty month for Hollywood movie, but that casual brutality masks the underlying economic reality.
Which is?
The public is simply unmotivated to engage with theatrical. The habit is broken.
And that just feeds this vicious cycle, right? Mm-hmm. The longer this apathy, this loss of the theatrical habit continues, the harder it becomes to reverse it.
A farce.
Fewer interesting movies lead to less theatrical urgency, which means even the occasional good movies struggle to find their audience. The habit of just going to the movies on a weekend has been broken, and October was the final proof point.
It was the culmination of everything that went wrong earlier. And when we look at the specific films that were released in October, we see so clearly why they failed to reverse this trend. The studios were just operating in complete panic.
The source labels this period the October dumping ground. Let's start with the film that was supposed to carry the month, the big one, Tron Heirs.
Tron Heirs was supposed to be the big tentpole.
The tentpole, right.
Meaning the one release that was intended to financially hold up the entire month for a studio, but the source just described it as a disastrously bad sequel.
And it connects it to a larger trend.
Yes, a trend of companies now digging, and this is a quote, hundreds of feet below the bottom of the barrel for long-discarded intellectual property.
That specific phrase, digging several hundred feet below the bottom of the barrel, is just so evocative of IP mining gone completely wrong. It's not just relying on established franchises anymore.
No, it's resuscitating corpses.
Exactly. It's resurrecting projects that failed to generate any cultural momentum 20 or 30 years ago because the studio is too creatively bankrupt, or maybe more accurately, too riskingless to try anything new.
And you can see that lack of confidence in the scheduling. The scheduling decision for Tron Eras tells a story of pure studio desperation. Well, the critique argues they clearly wanted to release this thing in the high-stakes summer because of its size and its budget. But they must have known internally the test screenings must have been just awful.
So they punted it.
They exiled it to the October dumping grounds, which sends a clear signal to audience. Even the people who made this movie don't have faith in it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, so the big sci-fi tentpole crashes and burns. Next on the failure list was One Battle After Another, which the source completely dismissed as a typical Oscar bait Hollywood wankfest.
Yeah, the criticism here is highly focused on cultural timing and relevance. This type of high-minded, overtly moralistic prestige picture used to thrive in the fall season. It was the bread and butter of.
Right, you'd get a slate of them every October, November.
But the source claims this one arrived about a decade too late. It was pushing what it explicitly calls political lectures onto an audience that is already completely weary. There's a severe cultural fatigue setting in around certain types of content.
And the accompanying description is just brutal. It says, nobody was interested in this one, and the whole thing came and went like a fart in the winds.
I mean, that speaks volumes about audience filtering, doesn't it? They are actively choosing to ignore content they perceive as overtly didactic or, just politically stale. Their time is too valuable.
And crucially, this wasn't just limited to these niche dramas or failed blockbusters. Even reliable A-list star power failed to move the needle.
Which is maybe the most worrying sign of all.
Let's consider The Smashing Machine. This was positioned as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's big attempt to pivot, to prove his acting chops by marrying his undeniable global star power with serious indie filmmaking sensibilities.
A24, a prestige label, a gritty true story. It had all the pieces on paper.
And it failed to make any impact whatsoever. Nothing.
That is a fundamental sign of broken trust between the stars and the audience. If the biggest, most bankable action star in the world attempts a prestige pivot, leveraging all his fame, and he still can't drive traffic.
What does that tell you?
It suggests the audience's apathy transcends genre itself. It's an apathy toward the idea of going to the movies for anything other than a guaranteed novel spectacle. The Rock playing a dramatic role is not an event anymore.
And traditionally, if your blockbusters and your prestige films fail in October, you can always rely on one thing.
Horror.
Horror to save the day. October is owned by horror. Yet, even this usually reliable genre disappointed with very, very weak numbers.
It was a bloodbath, even for the horror movie. We had Good Boy, which, the source says, offered a pretty novel spin on the creature feature horror.
So something new, something original.
Exactly. But that novelty didn't translate into commercial success. The haul was tiny, just $6.5 million. The audience wasn't rewarded for trying something new, so what's the incentive?
It's a terrible signal to send to creators.
And interestingly, the more formulaic approach actually fared marginally better, which further highlights this issue of risk aversion from the audience's side. Black Phone 2, described as a by-the-number sequel, performed better than the novel offering.
Okay, what did that bring in?
It brought in $70 million domestically. Now, while that's technically better...
It's not a savior.
No, it wasn't nearly enough to perform the miracle required to salvage a month that had already lost hundreds of millions in potential revenue. It was a single on a scorecard full of strikeouts.
But the decision that most damaged October's potential, according to the source, was the absolute corporate cynicism surrounding the handling of Frankenstein.
Ah, yes, the Frankenstein Netflix paradox. This one perfectly encapsulates the structural rot we're talking about.
Explain that.
The source argues this monster movie, a big name, a strong director, a recognizable IP, could have been the one film to provide some much-needed momentum for a theatrical, could have been a hit.
But Netflix, which produced it, did something bizarre.
They gave it the most limited theatrical window possible, a handful of theaters for a week.
And why? What was the logic?
Solely so it could qualify for Oscar. After that obligatory bare minimum run, it was punted, as the source puts it, straight onto...
This is a huge, flashing neon sign of institutional priorities, isn't it?
It's everything. Why would a streaming giant intentionally sabotage the theatrical run of a potential successful film? Because for them, theatrical exhibition is not a primary revenue stream anymore. anymore.
It's just a tool.
It's merely a stop on the securing awards validates the cost of their content library, and it helps with subscriber retention, which is ultimately more valuable to Netflix's stock price than a few extra $1 million in box office revenue.
So the company that owns the content is actively choosing to undermine the theatrical experience for the sake of its own internal streaming metrics or, for awards bait.
Yes, and this fundamentally breaks the value prop for the audience.
Right.
Why should I, as a moviegoer, prioritize the cinema if the content owner doesn't? Why should I rush out to pay top dollar for something the studio itself treats as a TV movie?
Makes no sense.
Exactly. So this whole collection of bad content, desperation for old IP, and these paradoxical release strategies collectively ensured October was a complete and utter disaster.
But as we noted, the seeds of this failure were sown long before October. They were sown during the supposedly profitable summer blockbuster season.
That's where the rot really set in.
Which moves us perfectly into Section 2. Summer fatigue and franchise forgettability.
The summer of disappointment.
Our source material lays the blame for the general apathy squarely at the feet of the summer blockbuster, which it calls a profound disappointment, consisting mostly of, and I'm quoting, disappointing sequels, awful remakes, and dreary franchise movies that we've seen a million times before.
And the problem there is one of stalled momentum. It's like a relay where the first runner stumbles out of the block. When audiences are not excited and energized by the summer films, when they don't walk out of the theater desperate to talk about what they just saw,
they lose the habit.
They simply do not maintain the habit of going to the theater in the fall. The summer films failed to create that necessary cultural energy to carry through the rest of the year.
And nothing symbolizes this cultural descent better than the superhero genre, which had spent, a decade plus commanding global cultural discourse.
It was the center of the pop culture universe for so long. Now, the source notes the genre's sad descent into cultural irrelevance.
Irrelevance is a strong word.
It is, but look at the data. We saw all three of the big Marvel movies released this year fail to make a significant cultural or financial impact. This indicates a profound shift in consumer. The fatigue has officially set in, and the source material argues the market is just saturated with what it calls superhero slop.
But the real test case, the big one everyone was watching, was on the DC side of the equation.
Yeah.
We had Superman by James Gunn.
Right, the big reset.
Massive goodwill surrounding the franchise reset, a beloved director, a fresh start. And yet, it barely managed to struggle past $600 million.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. I need to push back here for the listener. $600 million is still a massive success by traditional non-superhero metrics. Is the source maybe being overly critical here? Or is the $1 billion benchmark truly the bare minimum for a franchise relaunch in this climate?
That is a crucial point, and the source is clear on its analysis. $600 million is a major success for a comedy or an original drama. Absolutely. But for a flagship title, relaunching an entire cinematic universe centered on perhaps the most recognizable comic book character on the planet.
The expectations are different.
The expectations are everything. Warner Bros. Was absolutely expecting a $1 billion movie out of that. They needed it.
The expectation is the key metric.
Exact. When you factor in the massive production and marketing costs associated with restarting an entire universe, not to mention the sheer financial pressure on the studio to prove the DC brand is still viable after years of, misfires, $600 million is considered a major.
So what does that number signal?
It signals that a ceiling has been hit. Even a beloved character and a well-regarded director can no longer simply rely on IP recognition to break through the cultural malaise and generate that the magic is gone.
So if the superheroes are failing to launch, what about the established, non-caped action franchises? I mean, the sequel saturation continued unabated, yet the results were depressingly similar.
Take Jurassic World Rebirth. This was the 7th movie in that franchise. 7.
So that's a lot of dinosaurs.
It is. And it actually won the battle of the box office in July, bringing in a respectable $870 million worldwide. On paper, that sounds like a financial victory.
It does, but the source details the decay happening underneath that high number.
Right. That figure was $130 million less than its immediate predecessor. So the financial trend is clearly, steadily going down. And more damningly, the critique notes the film itself was, and this is a quote, "so fucking dumb and forgettable that I genuinely have to remind myself it even exists." And this is the critical distinction between monetary success and cultural relevance. It made money, yes, but purely due to the sheer historical weight of the IP and the guaranteed spectacle of CGI dinosaurs. It offered nothing new or memorable. It didn't stick with the audience.
So it's a hollow success.
Completely hollow. The IP is running on fumes, yet the studios are forced to keep mining it because of the high financial floor it provides. It's a safe bet for a decent return, but it does zero to build excitement for the future.
And the same fatigue plagued one of the most reliable franchises in history, the Mission Impossible series, with Final Reckoning.
Another big franchise sequel, another major disappointment relative to expectation. The source focuses heavily on the narrative fatigue here. It describes a pointlessly convoluted story and an ending that, despite the implied finality in the title,
Final Reckoning.
it failed to live up to the movie's own promise. This franchise is built on practical spectacle, on Tom Cruise doing insane things. But when even Tom Cruise leaping off a cliff can't guarantee attendance and excitement, it signals that generic action, no matter how well staged, is no longer enough to command the audience.
Okay, so we have to pause here and acknowledge that not everything was terrible. Our source does give credit where it's due. It points out a few decent performers that they failed to launch a culture.
That's vital for impartiality. It wasn't all bad. Sinners got a lot of well-deserved praise for its execution, but the source notes its sensibilities were more akin to an art house film than a tentpole. It was a good film, but it couldn't be a savior of.
And what else?
Weapons was described as a fun little horror movie that kept people entertained. But again, these were contained successes, not major cultural events. It didn't move the needle for the as a whole.
The source holds up Joseph Kosinski's F1 as a fascinating contrast. This was one of the few genuinely decent big-budget summer movies that left the viewer feeling good, reminiscent of the massive culture-shaping success of Top Gun: Maverick.
Yes, and everyone in Hollywood hoped, they prayed, that F1 would repeat the Top Gun phenomenon, a genuinely thrilling, emotionally satisfying blockbuster that appeals universally.
Like it did.
It failed to connect on that level. It finished with $630 million worldwide, which is, it's not a flop, but it's certainly not the stellar success they were banking on.
And the key takeaway here, and this connects right back to the problem of momentum, is that F1 was another movie to add to the list of films that nobody really talked about after it left theaters.
And this is the crux of the summer failure. This is the whole thing. High-quality, big-budget entertainment is no longer guaranteed to create a cultural moment. The conversation about these films vanishes immediately after the credits roll.
It's disposable.
Utterly. Hollywood failed to generate the kind of cultural and financial momentum over the summer that it desperately needs to carry it here. So the mood heading into autumn wasn't the patient, it was just a quiet, is that it? Is that all we're getting?
And this overwhelming sense of content failure and cultural apathy, it feeds directly into a very cynical analysis of what did succeed. This brings us into Section 3, where the money went remakes and foreign market. Because when we look at the few financial wins in 2025, they reveal a very telling and maybe a very damaging trend.
It's an important pivot, yeah. We need to focus on the two major Hollywood films that did succeed wildly because they were both based on the exact same kind of recycled content.
The only Hollywood production to break $1 billion was Lilo and Stitch, a live-action remake of a 20-year-old animated film.
And the other major success, also a live-action remake, How to Train Your Dragon.
So what's the source's explanation for why these two, out of everything else, broke through?
Well, it offers a very cynical but, financially sound explanation for their success. The critique posits that the success of both was entirely predicated on, and this is a great line, parents in their early 30s wanting to relive their childhoods while shutting their own kids up for a couple of hours.
Oh, that's brutal. So success based not on excitement for new ideas, brilliant storytelling, or compelling IP expansion, but fundamentally on nostalgia and convenience. You are literally buying 2 hours of familiar quiet time.
Exactly. This is pure IP recycling driven by convenience, not by innovation. And the expert analysis really needs to focus on the economics of this nostalgia. Why is it the only reliable driver of mega right now?
Okay.
Because studios calculate that the guaranteed minimum return on a known IP, even a lukewarm one, is far safer than the incredibly high risk of launching a complete. This locks the industry into this cynical, low creativity feedback. They're perpetually looking backward because it's the only path that offers any financial certainty.
So it's expensive, high production value babysitting that leverages a known quantity against parental exhaustion and a desire for familiarity.
That's the business model.
But even these successes were overshadowed by something far more significant, which brings us to a truly terrifying insight from the source material, the global dependency threat.
This is where the structural weakness of Hollywood's current model is just laid bare for all to see. The biggest movie of the year wasn't either.
And it wasn't made by Hollywood.
Not even close. And the analysis that follows this fact is deeply chilling for for West.
We're talking about a foreign production, a massive film, where 99% of its revenue came specifically from Chinese audience. This points to a profound vulnerability for Hollywood.
It's a vulnerability they built themselves. Hollywood spent years actively catering to the international market, particularly China. They modified content, they changed storylines, all in the belief that access to those massive ticket sales was the only way to achieve global blockbuster status. They became dependent. Now, this source illustrates that dependence works against them in a catastrophic way.
If a foreign film can gross an enormous sum, a globally competitive figure from its domestic market alone, it essentially eliminates the necessity of the Western audience, Western creative control, and Western studio involvement.
And that is the chilling prediction from the moment Chinese filmmakers figure out how to consistently produce domestically popular films that resonate deeply with their own massive unified market that also have even modest global appeal. Hollywood is fucked. That's the quote.
Unpack the mechanism of that prediction for us. How does that 99% domestic revenue change global marketing and production strategy?
Well, think about it. If you are producing a film primarily for a domestic market that is large enough to recoup a huge budget and turn a profit, you suddenly gain creative and financial independence. You don't need Western stars to sell tickets in Ohio. You don't need to pass Hollywood content approval or censorship. You don't need to adhere to international distribution norms set by the U.S.
It fundamentally changes the global power dynamic of content creation.
Completely. Hollywood becomes marginalized, left reliant on its own dying franchises and cynical remakes, while these emerging global competitors succeed without the power center of global cinema begins to shift.
So let's synthesize the content failure one more time.
Yeah.
We have disappointing, unmemorable franchise films.
We have forgettable superhero slop that nobody asked for.
And we have cynical remakes of old classic, and all of them failed to capture the cultural attention.
And that combination resulted in the source's perfect metaphor, a heady cocktail of forgettability and apathy. This cocktail absolutely killed the audience's enthusiasm for going to the movies, which is what set up that disastrous October. The industry was left culturally and financially flat.
And the failure to generate that cultural momentum over the summer meant that all the structural problems that had been brewing for years, problems Hollywood had hoped to simply paper over with a successful recovery year, they finally started to bite hard.
And that's the next critical.
This takes us into Section 4, Systemic Problems Biting Hard in 2025.
This is the analysis of the industry's slow suicide. The theatrical experience itself is under sustained attack from two major interrelated pressures: overwhelming commercial incentives to stay home and profound cultural alienation from the content and the stars.
Okay, let's start with the commercial side. The rise of streaming and those shrinking release windows. The source eloquently outlines the high-costing convenience equation that is forcing audiences to stay home. It's just eliminating any perceived value.
The convenience factor has become insurmountable for mid-tier content. It really has.
Yeah.
Why would you pay $25 for a ticket, plus another $15 for popcorn and a drink?
And drive for an hour, pay for parking.
Sit through 30 minutes of trailers, potentially deal with rude or disruptive audience members, all for a movie you don't even particularly care that much about.
Especially, and this is the key, especially when, with absolute certainty, you can watch it in the comfort of your own home in a matter of weeks, sometimes days.
The transactional friction high. The value proposition of the cinema has completely collapsed for anything that isn't an absolute must-see, essential, cultural, or unique IMAX-level event.
And technology has just accelerated this collapse.
Hugely. Home technology is a massive disruptor. Big screen 4K TVs and projectors are now cheap enough that most people can afford a really superior home cinema setup.
It's true.
And while it may not compete with the technical specifics of a true IMAX screen, the source argues that for 90% of general release, the gap between home viewing and theatrical viewing is no longer wide enough to justify the price and the effort. The financial incentive to stay home is now overwhelmingly strong.
Okay, so that's the economic structural erosion. Now we have to address the cultural erosion. The source makes a politically charged claim that we have to report impartially.
Right.
It claims that Hollywood's intense focus on what it calls identity politics has been slowly killing it over the past decade. So we need to analyze the mechanism of this alleged commercial damage as the source describes it.
The core argument presented is that this focus has led to a series of self-inflicted commercial wounds. The source argues that by prioritizing messaging and representation over universal mass appeal, Hollywood has alienated half of its potential customer base.
It's a business argument, not a culture war one, in the source's telling.
Exactly. It claims this focus has brought down big money-making franchises and actively stunted projects. So how does the source claim this shift manifests commercially, beyond just making film feel preachy?
Yeah, what's the financial link?
It manifests financially through market segmentation and creative stifling. The source suggests that this approach creates a sense of us versus them marketing, effectively losing large segments of the population like rural or politically conservative audiences who feel actively judged or unwelcome.
So they just tune out.
They tune out. Furthermore, the critique suggests that internal politics mandate costly script change or reach to satisfy specific ideological requirements, which stifles the genuine creativity you need for a truly compelling mass story. The studios were prioritizing their own internal conversations over connecting with an external audience.
And the ultimate consequence of this, according to this analysis, is the alienation of the movie star, the very people who used to guarantee butts in seats, regardless of the content.
Yeah, the critique focuses heavily on the souring of the relationship between audience and what it terms the self-righteous actors who take every opportunity to lecture the rest of the world on.
So the idea is that for the audience, the star power is diminished when the star is perceived as judgmental, out of touch, or more interested in preaching than in entertaining.
And the source material uses the specific case of Jennifer Lawrence as a primary, if belated, example of this realization finally dawning in Hollywood.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the argument is that Jennifer Lawrence, who has been very outspoken politically, finally seems to have realized there is a vast world outside her safe, privileged Hollywood bubble where people don't agree with her political takes and, more importantly, are just tired of hearing them.
The frustration reported by the source is that her job is to be a successful actor, not a political pundit.
Right. And that the audience has no need or desire to hear her political, arguing it was never her job to voice them publicly and that it actively hurts the entertainment product.
And this realization that politics is bad for business is viewed by the source as an acceptance that is, and I'm quoting again, half a decade late.
It just validates the entire critique about how delayed Hollywood's reaction is to clear market signals. They only began to acknowledge this fatigue when the box office numbers started correlating directly with the star's judgmental attitude.
And the source material doesn't pull any punches regarding the consequences of this delayed reaction, does it?
Not at all. It compares her career trajectory to the Hindenburg. It suggests she is only acknowledging this reality now because of her own professional decline, not because of some sudden cultural awareness.
It's a brutal assessment.
It is, but it underscores the central point. Hollywood was so insular for so long, so focused on its own internal messaging and validation, that it missed clear market signals about audience fatigue and cultural resistance until that resistance manifested as a catastrophic financial disaster in 2025. The industry was structurally and culturally incapable of pivoting until it was financially devastated.
It really seems like the common thread across all four of these sections, from the flops in October to the forgettable sequels to the celebrity burnout, is a total fundamental failure to connect with the mass audience.
That's it in a nutshell.
They're either serving up content nobody asked for, content that feels like a retread, or content that actively drives away large segments of the population.
Precise. We have witnessed a fatal combination of market due to consistently bad, unoriginal content, paired with structural erosion caused by streaming incentive value and amplified by cultural alienation stars. And that combination is the essence of the 2025 crisis. It proves that the initial mantra, survive until 25, was just tragically misplaced.
We set out on a mission today to synthesize a comprehensive critique of Hollywood's meltdown, and we've certainly unpacked the devastating figures, the film failures, and the cultural critique from the source material.
Yeah.
We've gone beyond the simple headlines to understand the deep structural failures at play.
And the two core takeaways for you, the listener, are clear. First, the crisis is a systemic collapse, not just a content slump. Throwing more money at a franchise or hiring a new director won't solve it. And second, the industry needs a fundamental shift in its value proposition.
What does that mean, a new value prop?
It means it must provide content worth paying a premium for, a genuine cultural event. Otherwise, it risks leasing the audience forever to all the competing demands on their time and money.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question about the future, something for you to continue mulling over long after this deep dive in. If Hollywood can't reverse this course, if they continue to prioritize recycled IP and internal messaging over genuine mass appeal, will they eventually return to printing money and entertaining the masses? Or will this current trend lead to its complete slide into cultural irrelevance?
And it's been potentially replaced entirely by cheap, high-volume AI content and those increasingly aggressive, creatively independent foreign competitors we talked.
The momentum is certainly not on Tinseltown's side right now.
The only way out is through radical innovation, but the sources we've looked at show an industry that is still terrified of change. They're clinging to the past while the future rushes right past them.